think about transportation as a whole. And while we always sort of have that function, this change in vision, this change of who we are and how we think about ourselves is very important, and it's impacting how we think about transportation in the future in our state. And this plan is not a plan for Department of Roads, not a plan for highways about which highway projects to pick. It is a plan for all of transportation for all of Nebraska, regardless of sort of color of money, whether it's a local issue or a federal issue. We want to be thinking about transportation and how it serves the people of our state. And that's a little bit of a change in mindset and something we're trying to embrace and adjust to as part of this plan. And the third piece, and this one ties in very well to today, is the technology that's coming. And Kelsey, if you could advance for me, there you go. And the technology, there is so much opportunity here to change the way we move, to change the way that transportation functions in people's lives. And we have to, in Nebraska, be prepared for this. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult to know when to invest in something. Tax dollars are scarce. And so how do you make the right investment at the right time to support these kinds of advancements and be prepared to do that? It's a very difficult challenge, and it's something that's coming at us faster and faster every day, and the opportunities are immense. But we have to be smart with our resources and make sure we are doing the right thing to invest at the right time. And so this piece of it is a huge challenge for us, everything from autonomous cars to electric vehicles to the way we share data and get real-time information in the hands of people and make decisions. All this stuff is coming at us, and it's huge opportunity. So trying to understand what these ramifications could be to help us craft a plan is one of the challenges, and what makes this plan very different than I think we've seen in the past. Next slide, Kelsey. I think when you look at the process, we could have a lot of slides talking about what our calendar and scope and everything looks like. This is the only one, and really it's important because that first piece, identify key influences. There are a lot of things that are influencing us that we're trying to understand and identify, and some of them are traditional, things like traffic projections, things like demographics, where people live, aging demographics, those kinds of things that you've seen in long-range plans for years. But there are other things that are influencing us in the technology world in other ways that we need to start to identify and understand. And that's where that uncertainty comes in. And the second part of this, analyzing the data, what we have, what we do know, because in many ways, things like take autonomous vehicles. You don't know when they're coming. You don't know what they're going to look like. And you don't know even, so you don't even know what's going to happen. And then afterwards, you don't know what the effects of on you as a DOT or as a transportation industry are going to be. Are people going to drive more, or are they going to drive less because they have a self-driving car? So there's huge impacts, and those uncertainties are hard to understand. And the goal here is to look at the data, try to make some smart predictions about what could happen, but also analyze all of those scenarios. And then in the third phase here, make some recommendations that regardless of where we go, we're prepared, and we can move forward with things that with the right amount of certainty that we know we can make the right investment at the right time. And so it's a very different kind of approach to a long-range plan than you've seen historically in Nebraska. I think in some ways we're breaking some new ground here, and also building off the expertise of other states who have dipped a toe in these waters. And then the bottom piece on the right, the public and the stakeholder input, it's so important to what we do at DOT. It's so important that we understand how the decisions that we make impact the lives of Nebraskans. And so making sure we get the right amount of input at the right time to really inform this plan is really important, and that's something that we've built into it as well. And so with that, I do want to turn it over to Curtis to introduce Kirk. But before I do that, I just want to thank you, Kirk, for joining us. I've known Kirk for a long time, 15 years or so. He knew me when I was just a young engineer at the Kansas DOT. He is really, and I'd say this, he is a titan of our industry. He's a mentor of mine. He's a friend of mine. Kirk, thank you for taking the time to join us. I wish it was in person, but we'll have to do it virtually. And I just can't thank you enough personally for joining us today. So with that, Curtis, maybe you can give a more formal introduction, and we can turn it over to Kirk Steudle.
Yes, thank you, Kyle. Very much appreciated. And I am very excited for Kirk Steudle today as well. Like you said, he is a titan in the industry. However, before I get to Kirk, I want to introduce another voice you're going to hear today. Back one slide, Chelsea. Somebody's going to be helping me facilitate discussion today. It's Courtney Ehrlichman. She's been a sub-consultant on this project, helping us organize and coordinate this event today. Her name is Courtney Ehrlichman. She is the CEO, founder, president of the Ehrlichman Group. She spent 10 years working with cutting edge technology with Carnegie Mellon. She's got a TEDx talk out there, and she's also a Carnegie Mellon alumna herself. So you'll hear her voice helping me facilitate some discussion, asking some questions. This is her subject matter expertise area. She's an expert in this field, and so she's going to be helping me, bring about some good questions, comments, and then facilitating discussion, like I said. So, Courtney, would you mind saying hello?
Hello, thanks for having me and thanks for that introduction. I'm very happy to be here and be working with Nebraska DOT on the Long Range Transportation Plan. And I look forward to Kirk speaking as a Titan. I've definitely looked up to Kirk and his 13 years at Michigan DOT, and I'm excited to hear him speak now.
Very good. So that's Courtney. That's her voice. That's what you'll be hearing later on when we get into asking some of these panelists some questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce Kirk Steudle, our keynote speaker this morning. Kirk Steudle is the Senior Vice President of Econolyte Systems, focused on excellence in intelligent transportation system design, deployment, operations, and maintenance, including its subsidiary, Cavita. Mr. Steudle retired from the state of Michigan service in October of 2018 after a 31-year career, and he served as the director of the Michigan DOT there from 2006 through 2018. He also served as the interim president and CEO of the American Center for Mobility from August of 2018 to March 2019. Kirk is a noted expert in surface transportation and a nationally recognized leader in integration of technology into transportation and the development of connected vehicle technology. He served as a chair for the Intelligent Transportation Society of America, ITSA. He's a board of directors in 2015 and a member of the Program Advisory Committee to the US DOT. His resume includes chairing of the Transportation Research Board, TRB, Executive Committee in 2014, and serving as the 2011-2012 President to the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, AASHTO. He is currently serving as the Vice Chair of the Engineering Society of Detroit. Kirk is a graduate, he's a Hall of Fame graduate from Lawrence Technology University, where he received his Bachelor in Science in Construction Engineering, and he was inducted into the Hall of Fame there in 2012. And he currently serves on the University Board of Trustees there. So with that, Kirk, if you wouldn't mind taking it away, please.
Great. Well, thanks, Curtis, and great to see you all. Kyle, it's great to see you, and it certainly is a pleasure to be here. I do wish we were in person. I remember those emails saying, there's this thing happening. Are you sure we're going to have this? And it was, yeah, we're going to have it. And then things proceeded to fall apart. So I'm glad that you're doing it in this way. I see we got over 100 participants. That's frankly fabulous. So my 30-year career with the DOT as a public servant, I was involved in many planning forums, and particularly in the last 13 years as the DOT director, I kicked off a lot of long-range plans. And it was really, to me, it was always a beneficial time to really begin to think strategically about where we ought to be. And I can tell you from the early ones that I was involved in the early 2006 timeframes as director, all the way till the last one we did before I left, they changed dramatically. And frankly, they changed dramatically because of this topic about technology. The technology is changing so fast. And even if you're on the leading edge of that, or sometimes the bleeding edge of that, it's still mind-boggling in what's possible. We have some really great panelists coming after me, and frankly, my job is going to be to try to set the stage for them. There's some national experts involved with the details, a lot of the technology that I don't want to steal any of their thunder, because that's going to be a fabulous panel, and my hat's off to Curtis and the team for bringing all of them together. It's really great. As I think about a long-range plan, I have a personal story. Back in 1997, I was in charge of one of our regional areas. It's called the Transportation Service Center that we had set up there. There was 26 of them across the state, little different format that we had shifted and really totally changed the whole structure of the Department of Transportation and moved to a customer focused full service engineering offices all across the state. So I was in charge of one of those. And I sat down with the regional development engineer, like from a district operations engineer, and we developed a 25-year plan for Interstate I-75 that went through our region. So it went all the way from south of Flint, if many of you now know the name Flint, and it went 120 miles north. And he and I sat down and said, okay, if we're going to rebuild this large freeway, how are we going to do that, right? There's not enough money to do this. So we sat down, we had a 6-foot-long map, and we laid it on a big table, and we started drawing. Said, okay, we can do this 6-mile segment and this segment, and then we do the bridges in this year. And we laid it all out. And frankly, I had it on my wall for probably a year. Well, last weekend, I was driving to northern Michigan, and I drove that stretch. And what occurred to me was it was now the 24th year since he and I had that meeting. And every segment except one piece had been redone. And it just struck me that something that we put together 24 years ago, that at the time I thought, oh, wow, this is a pipe dream. This is not going to happen. It did. Right. So that's where the planning piece is so important, and the continuation of checking back in to make sure that what you're doing, fits with that long range plan. So this is really important. And Kelsey, if you can switch to the next slide. What I want to do is, in order to go to the future is simple, right? The future could be 2 hours from now. The future could be next week, could be next month, or in our particular case, what we're talking about is 20 years, right? But there's a lot that's going to happen in that 20 years, a lot of things that are going to change. That's why we continually do long-range plans over and over again. I have always found through my entire career that the best way to go forward is to go backwards. And you have to look at, specifically in technology, what's happened in the last 10, 20, or 40 years to anticipate what's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years. And typically you've got to go twice as far back as you go forward. Well, from a technology perspective, we probably go 40 years back, and it's too far back. So go ahead, next slide. So we're going to stretch back. Okay, well, maybe we're not going to go back to the railroads that far back, but I do want us to think about all of the transitions. Go to the next slide, Kelsey. All of the transitions that have happened, and you can see through the industrial age, right, how steep that curve is. And then you get to the digital age and look at that curve, and then the information age up until where technology is pervasive all over the place. So that curve and that slope is really, really steep. So it means that we really need to be thinking in shorter timeframes of what's possible. So next slide, Kelsey. So let's go back to 1990. Anybody remember any of these innovations that came forward? Some of you might have had them. I have personal memories of all of these. Some of you in the audience probably are wondering, what are those things? And that's okay. Some of you have seen them only in pictures. The one in the middle, I think, is fascinating because we don't even have it anymore. That's called an answering machine. Remember when that was a big deal, right? They don't even have a thing called answering machines anymore. They're called voicemail, right? And every one of these Walkmans, I remember the first Walkman going, wow, this is so cool. I get music that can go with me. I don't have to have the speakers, and it's a personal, my personal music. It's just fabulous. And there's one other one that I didn't put on here, and I had a personal experience with it in 1991, and that was a pager. In 1991, my oldest daughter was born, and I rented a pager. For 6 weeks, it was called a baby pager. There was a special deal from what was then called Ameritech that you could rent a pager for 6 weeks. And I don't know if it cost me $50 or something. It was actually quite a bit at the time, but that enabled my wife to get a hold of me. It says, hey, we need to get to the hospital. And I lived an hour away from where I worked at. So as I put these slides together, I have used all of those, right? Blackberries, the amazing functionality of Blackberries and the ability to communicate with somebody. I used those in my early days as a DOT director when I'd go to the legislature and testify. My staff would sit in the back of the room, my experts would sit in the back of the room, and they would send BlackBerry messages to the friendly people on the legislative committee for them to ask me a question. It would make them look really smart, and I got a softball. Now, it changed a couple years later as other people got that. There was people that were opposed to whatever I was testifying in front of. They'd be sitting in the background sending zinger questions up to the panelists as well. So then I'd be getting these really zingers coming out of left field that I really wasn't prepared for. If you fast forward about 3 or 4 years, there actually was a point where I was giving a presentation in the legislature, and one of the legislators actually Googled what I was saying while I was saying it to see if it was actually accurate. So those technologies changed the way we really do business. Now, the reason I want you to think back to 1990 and think about those technologies, that was 20 years ago, right? And at the time, any of you that were here, those were amazing technological advances, and they changed the way we do business. And just go to the next slide. And from an audio perspective or the video perspective, there's the timeline. We seem to race through a lot of those, but in the end, does it really matter? But at the end of the day, there's going to be some kind of video. There's going to be, you know, it's a Betamax versus VHS. Okay, it doesn't take long, and then that's really not relevant anymore because we shifted to DVDs, and now we shifted to streaming, right? I remember when you could buy getting the Black Friday special on a Blu-ray player for, $100. Well, now they give them away, right? And who actually even has it anymore? So it's going to change. You shift this 4 or 5 years ahead, streaming is going to be so old school. Why would we ever do that? All you have to really think about is your experience in meetings, right? 2 months ago, this meeting was going to be in place or in person. We were all going to be there. And if we couldn't do that, then we'd have a conference call, right? So we have a conference call with 113 people on it. Imagine how that would go, right? How fast did we adopt technology that was already here, right? We already had video technology. We'd been using it for a number of years, but frankly, we just relied on conference calls. Now, if you have a conference call, it feels so old school. Why would you just have a conference call? You want to see video, you want to see faces, you want to see that interaction. So we need to think about what's here today can change very, very rapidly, and our ability to adapt is what's going to really help us in the long run. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, Courtney, there you go. So the Internet of Things, and this slide actually is a little bit dated, but it's the trajectory of the initial concepts from the late 2000s of this Internet of Things, just conceptually, all the way through to 2020 where we are today. And you can see the pieces along the way, right? Toothbrushes that are connected, traffic signals connected, thermostats are connected, electrical outlets and lights. Everything's connected now. Now it's actually causing a different problem because we have to think about all of those connection points as being a cybersecurity issue, right? Well, I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon. As you see that line go off the top of the chart, it's going to continue, right? We just got to figure out how do we manage through all of those. Let's go to the next slide. So if you think about it from a connected automated vehicle perspective, Futurama was a New York City World's Fair in 1939, and it had this vision of these super highways and cars everywhere. If you think about it, that was really only 25 years after the automobile was really introduced, like in a mass production style when Henry Ford started cranking out Model Ts. And then you fast forward to the DARPA Off-Road Challenge, and Courtney, I don't know if you were involved in that, but Carnegie Mellon is the one that won that. and their automated vehicle done out in the desert made it the furthest of everybody. Nobody completed it. It went 7 miles. And I'd be interested later to know whether Courtney was involved with the off-road challenge or not. But I know she knows a lot of colleagues who were. And frankly, some of them spun off. And then 5 years later, Google introduces the first self-driving car. Right now, that's even 10 years ago. Think about where that first car was, that first Google car, and what it could do, and think about what's happened in the 10 years since. So if you just look at that slide and just think about what the possibilities are from a technology perspective, right? 16 years ago was when that DARPA off-road challenge was going on, and it went 7 miles by itself in the desert, and it got hung up on a rock or some landform. Now, Google, now Waymo, is driving millions and millions of miles, and Tesla is driving millions of miles, as are all of the other auto companies as well. So let's go to the next slide. So now let's spring forward. Let's spring forward. We've been dealing with the past. Let's get to 2020, right? What are the things that are happening right now? Let's go to the first slide, or the next slide. So the future, particularly on the automotive side, is automated, it's connected, it's electric, and it's shared, right? That's really what we see the future pieces are, right? So we've got some experts that are going to really talk about some of those other components all the way through this as well. But if you think about the main users of a highway network, it really is, it's an automobile, and it involves all of those. If you're in an urban setting, you know, ride sharing, ride hailing, all of those are coming into play. Micromobility, mobility as a service. There's a lot of questions right now over the last 2 months. What does that really look like after we deal with a pandemic? Are people going to feel comfortable operating one of those? Or are people going to feel comfortable riding in one of those? What does all of that look like, right? The electrification clearly is moving rapidly. All of the big auto companies are moving much faster to some form of hybrid electric vehicles or full electric vehicles. Inductive charging is, you know, you can do that with your phone now. If you fast forward 20 years, it's not out of the realm of possibility that it is actually in place and it's in roadways, right? EV shuttles, we've got an expert coming on the panel that could talk about a lot about EV shuttles and what's happening. I've got a little slide coming up as well. And then the connection piece. But let's go to the next slide first. So you'll notice that last slide said automated, not autonomous. And actually that's on purpose, because autonomous means that it's self-contained and it makes decisions on its own. So think of a school district, right? Many times school districts are autonomous school systems. They make their own decisions. They're in charge of you know, what happens. An autonomous car would then mean that it could make every decision it needs to do on its own. No interaction with anything else, right? Whether turn right, whether turn left, what speed, all the rest of that. So it's really not autonomous. It is highly automated. And that's why that term was called automated. We clearly see it as automated. Let's go to the next slide. So if we think about all of the companies that are working in this space, the ecosystem is huge. So at the top, you have the big auto providers, you know, the Fords, the GMs, the Teslas, the Hondas, Toyotas, all the rest of them, and then the tier 1 suppliers. And then below that, you have all of these different areas and different companies that are inputting data into all of those systems as well. And then there's a whole bunch of tools down below. So this is a huge industry. If you just think about that DARPA challenge, and you think about the universities that were involved, they took the brightest minds that were there and engaged, and they were developing some form of robotic vehicle that could maneuver all of these systems, right? Now look what that has grown into, right? Because from the DARPA challenge, it grew into this, right? And the DARPA challenge, again, 2004, 15 years ago, and now here's the industry that's created. So I think a lot more to come. So let's go to the next slide. So that DARPA vehicle had all kinds of sensors and antennas all over it. Well, here's the modern day car. And typically there's about 200 sensors in a new car that rolls off an assembly line. Now, much of that information that's coming off of there is not useful to any of us, right? This is really for the automaker themselves. They're getting detection pieces. I remember in an early days, probably 2006 or 7, in 2008, we were doing a demonstration and we put up this thing called WiMAX, right? And we were pulling information off of a vehicle close to one of the automakers' headquarters. And frankly, the company came back and said, this thing is really valuable, right? We were pulling information about wiper conditions and defrosters and tire slippage. They were picking up pre-manufactured defects. So they were all on pre-production cars. So they could identify a warranty issue on that pre-production car and actually change it on the assembly line and save them a ton of money. But the point is, those vehicles are producing tons and tons and tons of data. And our challenge is to figure out, okay, now how do we harvest that data? It's one thing to have a lake that has all the data in it, but it's just like throwing fish into the lake. They're all gone. You really don't know what fits where. Now you got to figure out, how do you pull the right data out? How do you put them in the right spots? There's been, let's go to the next slide, Kelsey. There's been a lot of announcements about vehicles, when we're going to have automated vehicles, level 4, level 5, level 3. Just so you know, level 5 is complete autonomy, right? The vehicle makes all the decision on its own, and between you and I, that's a long ways away. I call those AVs in the wild, and there's so much to learn from all of those. But these are the announcements that were made, and this data comes from the Center for Automotive Research, and on when things were going to happen. Most of them have not been hit. Most of them, there's a lot of hype to it, right? There are a few that have come close to those. So let's go to the next slide. Some of you may be familiar with this, the Gartner hype cycle. If you haven't, just Google it. They do a new one every couple of years. And while on this slide, it's a little hard to see, if you Google it and pull it up, you can look at the different years and you can see how things have transitioned. So the peak, so if you just look at the different areas, it starts with the innovation trigger, right? And then it gets to the top of that is the peak of inflated expectations, right? And then the trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and then the plateau of productivity. Now, I purposely slid the 2019 over a little bit so you could see the only dot that is on that slope from 2017, and that's virtual reality, right? So it's moved through that, but every single technology will go through that whole cycle. And you can see on there, some of those are likely to happen in the next 2 years, 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10, and longer than 10. I'd encourage you to take a look at those, and I've always found it fascinating whenever they come out to just compare it to what was there before and see how things have moved. It's really quite interesting. Next slide. So that's the automated car side. So now it's the connected piece, right? So the car's connected to a whole bunch of different things. And if you think about just the car being connected to the traffic signals, which is frankly what my new company does, that's vehicle to infrastructure. But it's actually broader than that. It's the vehicle to your home. It's the vehicle to retail, right? How many of you use an app that helps you find the best price for gas, right? I use that as I drove across the country. Who's got the best price as I'm going across Nebraska? Where should I stop? the connected car into the grid. If things are electrified, there's going to have to be this smart technology, because if everybody is trying to charge their smart car at the same time, or their electric car at the same time, sorry, we're going to have problems with the electric grid. And then there is health, right? And that's the vehicle to pedestrian, vehicle to people, right? But in the middle of that, whenever you get in your car recognizes that connectivity that's there. So that's the connected piece. So let's move on. So as I think about the societal challenges that we have and the mobility demand, so and which are really the constructs for a long range plan, you have to think about, well, what are the challenges? How do you provide for services to solve these particular issues, right? And it really, there's a lot here about access. It's all about mobility. How do people move? How do they move in an urban environment? How do they move in a rural environment? How do they have access to things, access to service, access to broadband, right? That's a big issue in rural areas. Anywhere in the country, it's an issue. Access to healthcare. And the bottom of all of those is the Internet of Things. Doesn't matter where you're at in the country, if your phone doesn't have cell service and you can't get to Amazon, you're kind of ticked off, right? So if you just think about the needs that you have, and you think about how technology impacts them, it doesn't really matter if it's an urban setting or a rural setting. There's a technology component to all of it. They may bring different use cases to each one of them, but in the end, it's all about mobility. So we've talked a lot about today. We've talked about the past. Now, let's shift a bit forward and let's jump to the future. So go ahead. Now, I purposely picked that car. Actually, while I didn't have to take this picture, I did just see one of these in the Lowe's parking lot last weekend, which surprised the heck out of me. And what was really surprising is it's a lot lower and a lot smaller than I thought it used to be. It used to be really big. But if we think about the future and we think about what's possible, I'm going to give you some insights here of things that are happening right now, and I want you to use this as your backdrop. As Kyle said before, thinking about what's possible. Just because we've never done it that way doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about what else we have going on. So let's go to the next slide. So I know there's a conversation on the next panel about slow speed shuttles. And the shuttles are, here's a variety of them that are running on American streets right now. The one in the upper left corner is in Las Vegas. The one in the middle on the bottom is in Florida. The one in the middle on the top is at M City in Ann Arbor. The ones on the right are May Mobility. This is a shuttle that's running, actually launched in downtown Detroit, and now it is across the country in about 20 different cities. It's an automated vehicle that legally can go up to 25 miles an hour. And then Ollie is in a number of them as well. And again, I'm going to let the panelists talk about that. But slow speed shuttles, they are slow. But if you think about that DARPA challenge, that DARPA car did not go really fast. So just think about what's happened in that time frame. And shuttles are going to be on that same trajectory, right? There's a lot to learn, but there's a lot of potential benefits as well. So let's keep going. What about wearable technology? So my banner seems to be gone. So wearable technology is available today. Some of it is pretty futuristic. That picture on the right or the left there is actually a picture of Lady Gaga flying in her new outfit, right? Okay, so it seems a little far-fetched, but is it going to seem far-fetched 10 years from now? If you look at the middle one with a shirt that has sensors all over it to give the athlete, or frankly maybe the weekend warrior, some indications as to what's happening with their body and how are they training, there's huge possibilities there. And it sends it to your phone. Maybe it sends it to somebody else's phone. If I think about it from a health perspective, I have a relative that has diabetes, and their blood sugar is monitored and sent to a cell phone and sent to their significant other as well. So there's lots of technology. This last one is a wearable cell phone. And the important thing is all of that technology for screens is now bendable and mashable. Frankly, I saw it at Foxconn in Japan, probably 3 years ago, and saw these screens that can mold and change. So it's not that far away. If you just think about that technology, how does that change our personal life to help set your mind for how does it change for transportation as well? So let's go to the next one. How about last mile shipping, right? This one's happening right now. It's Amazon, right? We've talked about it. Plenty of you have seen it. Think about where that is 10 years from now, right? Let alone 20, right? Expand your mind as to what's possible. Let's go to the next one. There we go. So this is a little autonomous vehicle. Actually, it's an automated vehicle. Sorry, it's not autonomous because it is having some interaction from a human, but it is delivering food within a 2.5 mile radius of downtown Ann Arbor. So you order it from a store, it gives you a message. When it comes, you got a code, you punch in the code, it opens it up, you take out your food, and off it goes back to the store. Each time the door closes, it sanitizes itself. Think about where that's going to be in 5 to 10 years. Let's go on to the next one. Here's another one that is deployed right now. It's called a Large Area Autonomous Disinfecting Robotic Vehicle, or LAD. And it is actually operating in an airport. And it goes in and disinfects, where normally some person would be, spraying disinfectant. It does it all on its own. Let's go to the next one. So a big concern about, we're losing the heading on this one, about construction and how do we take this technology in construction? Here's technologies today that are being used in the construction area. My favorite is that one in the middle. There's a worker carrying a 200-pound beam, 200 pounds. You can't pick that up. Well, it's because of the exoskeleton that goes around them that helps them do that. One of the most injury-prone jobs on a construction site or on a maintenance crew is running a jackhammer. My days at the DOT, I can't tell you how many maintenance workers I talked to in their early 50s that were just complaining about having back problems. And when you really looked into it, they were on the bridge crew and they were lugging around a jackhammer most of their career. Well, what about this, right? Let's let the machine do the work. And really a fun one down on the bottom, it's a little hard to see. That's an automated bricklayer, laying bricks on the side of a building. Now you could say, look, those are all jobs that somebody used to have and now they're not available. Yes, that's a legitimate argument. But at the same time, there's different jobs, right? Somebody still has to watch that machine to make sure it's going appropriate. Somebody has to program it. Somebody has to keep it maintained. There's different jobs and frankly, a better quality of life because of it. Let's go to the next one. This next one, smart farming. I don't know, and maybe many of you have seen this. I grew up on a very small farm. We didn't and wouldn't have had any kind of this technology. Frankly, when we got to a 6-bottom plow instead of a 3, that was high technology. But as you can imagine, or maybe as you know, all of the technology in all of those vehicles now, even though they're being driven, are pretty significant. And they're all connected back to the barn or the front office, right? And so if you think about automation, and automation for the things that are the mundane tasks, the things that take over and over and over, like picking, right? Here's a robot picking tomatoes. Think about how sensitive that has to be, or seeding and weeding, and how you use drones. The point here is the technology is becoming much more commonplace, it's becoming much more sophisticated, and the costs are going to continue to drop. Just like the cost of that pager that I rented in 1991, right? Now, nobody would ever paid that much for 6 weeks. Those prices are going to continue to fall. The big thing is automated vehicles are coming to the farming sector at the same time. Now, the farming sector is a huge user of our transport sector. So we've got to think about how are they using it? How do we adapt it? How do we do this together? One additional side story, we had, when I was at the Michigan DOT, we had some issues with the satellite positioning, the GPS coordinated positioning, and we were arguing with the provider of that, and at one point said, okay, well, we're just going to shut it down. And figuring that impact was going to hit just the DOT's surveyors and other surveyors. The people that called the most were the farmers, and the governor's chief of staff was a farmer. He called me within days going, hey, what happened? How come I can't get any signal? And that got turned back on pretty fast. Let's go to the next slide. So it really is all about the vehicle to everything. It's vehicle to the network, it's to the pedestrian, it's to the infrastructure, it's vehicle to vehicle. So let's go forward one more slide. And here's what Forbes says. Here's the biggest trends in 2020 that everybody must know about. AI as a service. That's artificial intelligence as a service. Instead of buying the whole company, you just buy what you need, right? 5G digital networks, right? Those are coming. There's huge issues between 5G and direct short-range communications for infrastructure. Now, how does all that fit together? Autonomous or highly automated driving, personalized and predictive medicines, computer vision, extended reality. Remember before on that hype curve, I said virtual reality was coming? Well, extended reality is virtual, augmented, and mixed reality all brought together. And then the last one is blockchain. So let's go to the next slide. So if you think this is really too far out and that you know what, we're just going to go at this slow pace. Here's two pictures, and some of you have seen this choice before. How many of you can picture in the 1900s picture, where's the car? This is the Easter Day Parade, 1900, Fifth Avenue, New York City. All horse and carriages. If you look right in the middle and over towards the curb, there's a car. Now fast forward 13 years. Same Easter Day Parade, same Fifth Avenue, different block. There's one horse. Where's the horse? 13 years. It went from only one car to only one horse. So in this long-range plan, there will be significant changes that you all are going to have to think about and plan for. It's really the resilience piece. How do you build a plan that can be flexible enough to take in all of this information, all of these new technologies, and use them for the good of the people of Nebraska and the motorists in Nebraska. So my last slide for you is really the question. So what are the possibilities for Nebraska? Those of you that recognize the upper right picture, that's from the 1920s, building a skyscraper in New York City. Does it look like this in the future? And with that, I think we have a few minutes for a couple of questions, and I'd be happy to take those. And Curtis, I'll let you jump back in to be the moderator.
Yeah, Kirk, I've got a question for you here first. You mentioned a little bit about 5G, and you've got communications, you've got some frequency issues with 5G. I'm curious to know about how does 5G, as well as things like dedicated short-range communication, how's that kind of stuff going to impact the way connected and automated vehicles are deployed?
Curtis, thanks. That's a great question. And frankly, it will impact it. But from an owner's perspective, you need to just let that work itself out. Private companies are going to figure that out, right? That's between the cell carriers and the auto companies, and the technology companies that figure out which one of those are going to communicate. But in the end, there's going to be a communication stream. So if I think about public agencies, my advice to them is be technology agnostic, let those battles happen, and just be prepared that there will be some communications link between the vehicle and the infrastructure and protect yourself so that you're not stuck in one camp or the other, or make sure that it's backwards compatible. And there are technologies that can do both of that. But great question.
Courtney, do you have any questions for Kirk, or do you want to brag about your DARPA project at Carnegie Mellon for a little bit? What have you got for us?
I just typed a note to you, Kirk, in the chat box. So I actually started at Carnegie Mellon as a researcher in 2008, right after the 2007 DARPA Urban Challenge, which Carnegie Mellon also won in an autonomous vehicle called the Boss. And you know, I like to say the autonomous family tree starts in the basement of the Robotics Institute at Carnegie Mellon. Of course, there's also some folks like Sebastian Thrun at Stanford, but you know, Google scooped most of CMU's team, including Chris Urmson, who now runs Aurora, Brian Selesky, who now runs Argo. Of course, there's Anthony Lewandowski, who is kind of the dark horse and has been sued by Uber and I think just filed for bankruptcy. So I worked actually with Raj Kumar, who you know, Kirk, through my work sort of as the deputy executive director of the two national university transportation centers, research centers, sort of that were named by US DOT to do transportation technology research. And I actually ended up working with members of the DARPA team in the basement of the Robotics Institute to develop a technology that we spun out into a company called Robotics. So I'm co-founder of that company, and I was just down in Brian Selesky's office last month talking to him, but I would highly recommend to the audience, if you're interested in that story at all, there is a book called Autonomy. I think the author's name is Lawrence Burns, and he's actually from Michigan, Kirk, and he writes about his time as a consultant for Google and just how this whole autonomous vehicle family tree unfolds. It's really a fascinating story. So that makes sense.
And the predecessor company that Larry Burns was at General Motors, leading technology for decades.
Right.
Yes. Hey, there's your question.
Kirk.
Yes.
Julie Harris has a question. Julie Harris, I know she's the head of our local statewide bike and pedestrian interest group here, and she asks about what happens in the interim. She has concerns that vulnerable road users will bear the brunt of the testing. What might you say to somebody who's concerned about that?
So that's a legitimate concern, right? And you know, I think you can make the same claim about automated vehicles, right? So when there was a tragic death in Arizona, people were screaming about this automated vehicle killed this person crossing the road. When there was a crash of the Tesla in Florida that ran into the side of a truck, there was huge outcry. So this can't happen. My response, and I was a DOT director then, and I had lots of media inquiries, which says, okay, what about the other 99 people that died that same day of a traffic crash, right? So is it all going to be perfect to begin with? No, right? That first DARPA challenge went 7 miles. So I would carry that same thought to pedestrians. We unfortunately, there are pedestrian crashes and fatalities across the country right now. And there are going to be some from automation. I would agree completely. I think our challenge is, how do we put the best safeguards around it? I don't think you can make anything 100% foolproof. Because our human nature is not foolproof, right? We're killing people today. I think our job is to figure out how best to manage that and how best to mitigate it and how best to lower the risks for that happening. So I think by even asking the question, that becomes an important decision point, and one of those pieces that you always come back to that says, okay, well, what are we doing to protect pedestrians, right? And make sure that it's part of the discussion. A similar conversation I had a number of years ago with community, a disabled community, an advocate associates that were working and looking at automated vehicles and said, well, how are they accessible? And I have a very good friend that is blind, and they said, she's not totally blind, but blind enough, and she can't really tell colors. She said, how do I know which button is which, right? So we got them engaged in the conversation with the developers, and I think that's the important piece here, right? We got to include that in the conversation and understand we've got to figure out how to do that. That's a great question.
Well, Kirk, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. You were excellent. You fulfilled all the hype that I had heard about you. You are a tremendous keynote speaker. Thank you for coming on. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce our next set of panelists here. I'm going to begin with an internal employee. His name's Matt Baker. Matt Baker is NDOT's Transportation Systems Management and Operations Engineer. He's graduated with his degree in electrical engineering from the Dastardly Iowa State University. He is a Dastardly Cyclone. And he's been with the NDOT here now for 16 years. And he's licensed, of course, as a civil engineer, but also as a professional traffic operations engineer. So that's Matt Baker. Can we move on to Jeremy? Jeremy Mattson works for the Small Urban and Rural Center on Mobility. It's a program of the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute, the UGPTI. That's at NDSU. He conducts research addressing mobility needs in rural and small urban communities. He's also an assistant professor within NDSU's College of Business. And being an NDSU bison himself, it's my understanding that academia usually doesn't like to hire their own from within. They like to get some diversity and other opinions from outside. So in order for them to go and take an incestual hire of their own alum, he must be quite the distinguished individual. So Dr. Jeremy Mattson is somebody else we're very excited to have on. We also have Jonnie Kusek. Jonnie is the executive director for Senior Services Incorporated, a nonprofit organization based out in Alliance, Nebraska, out in the Panhandle. She is the transit director /chief/COO for Panhandle Trails Intercity Public Transit and the new Panhandle Connect Ride Service, divisions of Senior Service, Inc. Ms. Kusek's background is in transportation services, business management, community involvement, and this includes the opportunity to work with numerous transportation, technology, mobility, management, medical, health and wellness, and social service entities. Through mutual collaborations, she works with organizations to increase their abilities to serve clients, create more vibrant communities, and to build a stronger Nebraska Panhandle region through the use of public transportation. She's the 2014 recipient of Nebraska's Association of Transportation Rookie Manager of the Year Award. In 2016, she was the Rural Mobility Champion Award winner, established the National Transportation Research Board's Rural Public and Intercity Bus Transportation Committee, and in 2018, she was recognized as the Community Star recipient by the National Organization of State Offices of Rural Health. So if that trend continues, winning awards in 2014, 2016, and 2018, 2020 is here. We're looking for big things from Jonnie there. Valerie Lefler is our final panelist of the day. Valerie is the founder and executive director of the nonprofit organization Phoenix Mobility Rising, based here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Ms. Lefler is an international expert in rural transportation and innovation in low population density communities. In just the first 2 years, Phoenix has launched programs in 6 different states with notable partners, including the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center, AARP Office of Driver Safety, Toyota North America, and Easter Seals. Lefler was featured by Smithsonian Magazine of one of the top 9 innovators to watch in 2018. She's also been highlighted in publications such as the New York Times, NPR, and the Christian Science Monitor. So we want to welcome our 4 panelists, and with that, I think it's time to pass the baton to Matt Baker, and Matt is welcome to begin his presentation. Matt, take it away.
Thank you, Curtis. I'd like to touch on a couple current technologies and past technologies, as Kirk touched on, it's important to understand where the NDOT currently is and how we are preparing for the future of transportation technology. Most importantly, I'd like to start with the why we invest in transportation technology, and Kirk mentioned it. It's a focus on mobility, and more specifically, we believe that mobility equals safety on the roadway. Kyle also touched on the importance of connecting with the public and staying agile with the future with wise investments. And so I'm going to talk about our current technology capabilities on the highway. There's going to be a common theme of ensuring quality data is coming in and we are getting accurate real-time data back out to the traveling public. A lot of that is dependent on robust communication infrastructure. And as an example, I'd like to talk about the 370 corridor. A few years ago, Director Schneweis challenged us to make it an example of what a connected corridor in Nebraska would be. It needed to demonstrate current technologies, but also be prepared for the future and how we invest. I'd like to reveal what that is. Slide, please. So as highlighted in light blue along the southern edge of the Omaha metro area, the 370 corridor is 16 miles of higher speed urban divided highway. It has around 24 signalized intersections, and that number is growing, and the technology happens to be over 20 years old. It's a huge part of staying current with importance in technology on the roadway is keeping it current and staying up with modern technology. One of the big challenges of the corridor is that it includes 3 local partners in Gretna, Papillion, and Bellevue, but that is really what is the bright spot of the corridor is it illustrates collaboration with local partners and other stakeholders at making sure that mobility is maintained or improved. So we definitely modernize those signals and the technology in the cabinets and include the upgrades of all the signal detection at those intersections. They include cameras and also had cameras in between intersections if there were any blind spots. And the biggest part, as I talked about earlier, the communication infrastructure, we chose to bury dedicated fiber along the corridor. That'll allow for the connection of the signals and also set central communication to the corridor to help manage it. Next slide. A huge part of why this came about was the National Connected Vehicle Signal Phasing and Timing Deployment Challenge, or SPAT challenge for short. The challenge was issued on a national level, an attempt to break that gridlock between public and private sectors on who may invest first. And there was always a hesitation of, and as Kirk mentioned, how do you stay agile and invest in something when maybe the rest of the industry hasn't invested in it yet, and you may not have the assurance that you have a wise investment. With all that being said, we went ahead and met the SPAT challenge, which was to deploy dedicated short-range communication technology. We did that at all of the signalized intersections on this corridor. We do know that the DSRC technology is dependent on the 5.9 gigahertz dedicated band, and we have been keeping up to date and recent events that dedication is being jeopardized because the competing interests in that band is very high. It's a very valuable asset, and I think one of the key things for the future of that technology is making the appropriate investments in it to demonstrate that we are willing to move forward on the subject. But reiterating also that along this corridor, fiber was the critical element and what we view as our highest improvement or investment for the future. The communication, getting that data in and getting that data out. So next slide illustrates how we have expanded that. around the rest of the Omaha metro area, because the 370 corridor is not the only one. We do have 680 and 480, US 75, and then US 6 along West Dodge, on south along as it joins N31 down through Gretna. And we've also placed fiber along I-80 from the Iowa border all the way to Lincoln. We've done this, as I've said, the communication infrastructure is always the critical element to deploying technology along the roadway. In an urban situation, communication can be a hindrance because the density of communication in the area hinders our connections. We'll talk about what the rural application is in a little bit. Most of this fiber connects, on the next slide, to standard historical devices. They have a high level of value, and those include cameras, dynamic message signs, and RWA stations, or road weather information weather stations. All of this data that's collected by these traditional devices is key in getting information to the motorists and making decisions about their commute or their transfer of commerce. This map is actually outdated by only a year. And as you can see, it doesn't even have the technology that I spoke of represented along 370, and even the corridors mentioned are short a couple pieces of technology just from a single year. And in the past, we've relied heavily on cameras and then appropriate density and using pan tilt zoom technologies to keep visual on what's happening with traffic. But with the installation of dedicated fiber, we can now explore increasing the density of cameras and other devices, and maybe even looking at single frame cameras that are focused on hazardous spots to keep up on information and get that information out. It will also allow us to look at active traffic management in the Omaha metro area. And a key part of that is working and collaborating with our local agencies like the City of Omaha and Papillion and Bellevue and La Vista and all the others that are impacted not only by the traffic in the interstate grid, but then the local traffic and how it impacts the interstate grid. Next slide. I just wanted to throw this in to show the fiber does continue on to the west edge of Lincoln. And these areas are what we have classified as urban technology along transportation. A lot of the devices on here, the reason we put the fiber in was to keep up with the density of devices. But I know the main focus about today is rural Nebraska. So what about the rest of Nebraska? On the next slide, we've taken the lessons in that example on 370, and every interchange west of Lincoln is now considered a connected interchange. We've deployed devices like cameras at the center of the interchange, on-ramp remote control closure gates. We have our historic dynamic message signs, and in the future we will be looking at variable speed signs along with weather stations and also the DSRC deployments. You can see in this picture that a lot of these are all webbed together to that central communication point in the center of the interchange by fiber optic. Again, we want to make sure that we have robust communications so that all of these devices are accurate and real time. We also know that the distances that this fiber covers, especially between variable speed signs in east and west along I-80, but also the interchanges where we do have DMS, that can be anywhere from 1 mile of coverage to 4 miles of coverage that there will be fiber along I-80. And then given that the interchanges have an average density of 8 miles separation, we do have a rising percentage of I-80 that's covered with fiber that will serve us well for the future. On the next slide, we talk about the rest of the state, and all of these data points represent where we already have technology, and similar to the picture in the Omaha metro area, this picture is actually out of date as well. Another year worth of devices has been deployed, so our densities continue to increase. And I think one of the best parts to highlight with this map is, we do a good job of trying to watch to see that these devices are working, but oftentimes we don't have to. We will know that a device is not working because a member of the public, or one of our customers, will call in and ask, and I quote, "Why is my camera down?" And we always take that and take it with pride that the public is displaying that they're taking ownership of these investments. They are using the information, and they're almost dependent on the information that we provide to make their decisions on the everyday life and their work and their jobs and agriculture. Once again, bringing it back to one of the key parts across the state is communication infrastructure. And while we do have a fair amount of the higher density, traffic density corridors covered, the challenge is always going to remain rural broadband connectivity. And we're very excited that there's a continuing effort on the entire state's coming out of the unicameral, the entire state's effort with the Rural Broadband Initiative. We look forward to taking and playing our part and our role in that initiative, as we see ourselves as serving the customers for many different reasons beyond just transportation. On the next slide, we also have made the investment in mobile technologies. Our entire plow fleet has been outfitted with technology, including location data. There's entry of road condition data. It talks about and collects what has been done to help bring the road back to an improved condition during winter events. And then there are cameras on the dashboards, so the traveling public can see where are the snow plows, what kind of conditions are they facing, and maybe even on a simple example, delay their movement another 10 minutes, because they know if they wait, a snowplow will have come through and improved the condition of the roadway. All of these investments on the next slide are leading to vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure future, as Kirk touched on. We do want to spend our money wisely. We want to invest in the future, primarily in communication infrastructure, but we also know that all of these things depend on quality pavement. There can be other smaller investments like 6-inch striping, which the industry has talked about will help with autonomous vehicles. And there are many other elements that we could talk about that the NDOT is doing. And some of them include smart work zones and even customizing our construction phasing based on traffic data and patterns for peak and non-peak traffic congestion. All of those things kind of give you a snapshot of what the DOT currently has and how we're prepared for the future. Curtis, I'll turn it back to you.
Matt, thank you. Excellent presentation. And we're gonna, in the interest of time, we're gonna skip over to Jeremy real quick here. So Jeremy again is from North Dakota State University with the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute. Jeremy, are you ready?
Yep, thank you. So I'm gonna switch gears just a little bit and talk about transit, about rural transit and the benefits of providing transit services, and whether there is justification for increasing investments in these services. So I'm going to talk about a study that I did recently for the Minnesota Department of Transportation. It's published just a couple months ago, And the motivation of the study was that they wanted, the state DOT and the transit agencies wanted some hard information on what the benefits are of their services, some actual data, so they could use that information to make the case for increased investments to help inform investment decisions in transportation. So if you go to the next slide, one of the first things we did was we surveyed stakeholders across the state in greater Minnesota. And we asked them what they perceive as the benefits are of transit in their communities. And this slide shows those benefits that they most often identify as being a benefit of transit in their communities. And it includes things like supporting independent living, supporting local businesses by encouraging people to live in their communities, improving access to healthcare and jobs and shopping, and allowing for seniors to age in place and improving quality of life, keeping people living in the community, and etc. You see there's quite a few benefits that they identified. So then based on this information we received and a review of some other research, on the next slide you can see that I created this, I call it Transit Benefits Assessment Tree, which identified the many different potential benefits and impacts of providing transit services in rural areas or small urban areas. And so there was two main types that I identified. There's the societal benefits of transit, which includes describes how society is better off as a result of investing in the transit services. And then the economic impacts, which includes things like jobs created and labor income supported and additional business profits and total sales or output. I'm going to talk mostly, in the interest of time, on those societal benefits and quickly show some of the results that we got from that. And the societal benefits include two main types of mobility benefits, which is the benefits of providing trips to people who otherwise would not be able to make the trip if transit was not available. And the efficiency benefits, which are benefits of taking trips by transit instead of driving or making that trip some other way. And the mobility benefits include benefits directly to the transit user. This includes low-cost mobility benefits, which is the benefits of having a lower-cost transportation available to you instead of having it for people who can't afford to own an automobile or to take a taxi or Uber for every trip that they take. And also the access to healthcare benefits. These are benefits for providing trips for people who would miss those healthcare trips if transit was not available. And that can be pretty important. So the benefit includes improved quality of life, as well as it could be reduced healthcare costs, because if people miss healthcare trips, it could result in more expensive healthcare later on. There could also be relocation cost savings, because without transit, some people may need to move, whether it's to an assisted living facility or just to some other community or somewhere else that has better access. And there's also other intangible benefits that are hard to really measure, like improving quality of life, improving social connectedness, etc. And then there's public cost savings. There can be potential public cost savings to other programs within the government. And so specifically, we looked at public assistance programs, because if transit improves access to work, so it means that more people can get to work, which means that fewer people may be unemployed, and so fewer people may be receiving welfare payments. So there could be cost savings to the government for other programs. There's productivity benefits by improving access to work, by increasing the available pool of labor that's available to employers, and by improving access to education to increase the skills of the workforce. There's also equity benefits by providing opportunities for people who are disadvantaged. There's option values, just having another option available can be a benefit to anybody. And efficiency benefits include by taking transit, you can reduce vehicle costs. You can chauffeuring cost savings refer to if someone gets a ride from someone else. If you have to rely on someone else for a ride, the person providing the trip incurs the cost of operating the automobile, but it also takes time. So that takes in consideration the value of the time for the person who has to make that trip for them. And there's other things such as travel time impacts, safety benefits, environmental benefits, congestion, physical activity benefits that we looked at as well. And then the economic impacts, I'm not going to talk as much about that, but just to describe what those are, there could be impacts from transit spending. So transit agencies, they employ people, so they directly create jobs. They employ drivers, dispatchers, managers, etc. Other businesses in the community also benefit by providing services or inputs or supplies or products to those transit agencies. And the people who work for the transit agencies and those other businesses, they spend money within the local economy to support additional activity. And also there's impacts from improved access to shopping. So we found that some of the transit riders, if transit wasn't available, they would not make as many shopping trips. So they may not spend as much money in the community. Some of them said that they would spend more money online, purchasing things from out-of-state online businesses. So transit then can keep some of that money in the community. And then without transit, again, some people may need to move out of the community. So by keeping people living within the community, again, that supports the local businesses. So go to the next slide. I did a series of case studies across the state. So we tried to actually measure these different benefits. And on the left, you can see all of the transit agencies in Greater Minnesota. So it's so Greater Minnesota, I mean, outside of the 7-county Twin Cities metro area. And so I categorized all of those transit agencies into 6 groups and then picked one case study from each of those groups. So we have a variety of different types of transit agencies. We have a very rural large system in northern Minnesota, the Paul Bunyan Transit. Timber Trails was a small single county system in a low population county. St. Cloud Metro Bus is a urban system, a small urban system. You have Trailblazer Transit, which is a multi-county system closer to the metro area, a little bit different service area characteristics. You have St. Peter Transit, which is serves a single smaller city. And then the Southern Minnesota Area Rural Transit is a multi-county regional system in the southern part of the state. So you can go to the next slide. And for each of these case studies, we surveyed the riders, asked them a number of questions. And one of the important things that we asked them was how would they have made the trip they were taking if transit was not available? And so this helps us identify the benefits of providing this service. And results are pretty consistent. About a third of the riders said that they just would not have made that trip. And a lot of the others said that they would have relied on a family member or friend to provide a trip. Some would have used a more expensive taxi or Uber or Lyft for that trip. Some of them would have walked. And we asked this question in summer. If we asked it in winter, I don't know if as many people would have said that. But we found that very few would have driven themselves. Overall, only about 3% would have driven themselves, because a lot of these riders just could not drive or did not have access to a vehicle. And you can go to the next slide. You'll see we asked about importance for transit for different types of trips. So specifically for work, we found the service was very important for them for getting for work trips. 63% of those who use transit for work said that without it they would not be able to keep their job. And we also, as work trips, shopping trips, healthcare trips were the most common types of trips that we found that were being used. And also for healthcare trips, we found many said that they would miss appointments if the transit service was not available. And you can also see some of the respondents said that they would have to relocate if there wasn't transit service. 10% of them said that they would move to a different city. And then some also said that they would move somewhere else nearby. On the next slide, we can see the actual calculations that I made for those benefits. So these are the ones that we were able to put a dollar figure on. Some of them we just quantified in some other way. We couldn't put a dollar figure on. These are those benefits that we monetized for each case study. And you can see the biggest benefit really was the access to healthcare benefit. That comprises really a large portion of the total benefit. Providing trips to people, providing healthcare trips for people who otherwise would not be able to make that trip really provides a tremendous value. And there's also other types of benefits that we calculated. Within the efficiency benefits, the chauffeuring cost savings was the largest, because a lot of riders would have had to rely on someone else to provide that transportation. And then on the next slide, you can see that I took all of these total benefits and then divided it by the number of costs, by the number of trips they provide to calculate a total benefits per trip. And then I compared that to the total cost per trip to calculate the benefit cost ratio. And you can see that for each of these 6 case study agencies with varying characteristics, they all had benefits being greater than the total cost, with ratios ranging from about 1.5 to 4.2, so indicating that $1 of investment in transit yielded benefits of $1.50 to up to $4.20. And on the next slide, there was also other benefits, that kind of intangible benefits that I couldn't put a dollar figure on, but we found that most of the writers agreed or strongly agreed that transit allows them to make more trips. It increases their social interaction with other people, improves their social connectedness, reduces social isolation, reduces stress level, allows them to live independently, improves overall quality of life, and keeps them connected to their town. So these are also really important benefits that can have mental health implications, so further benefits beyond what we are able to put into dollar terms. And next slide. Transit also promotes equity. It serves a disproportionately higher percentage of minorities, households with no vehicles, low-income individuals, people with a disability, and older adults. And you can see that on these figures here, where for those case study agencies, the figures show the percentage of the transit riders that belong to these different population groups, and the percentage of the service area general population that belongs to those population groups. So you can see it serves a much higher percentage of these disadvantaged groups. So without transit services, these groups would be disproportionately impacted. And then on the next slide, so those results from that Minnesota study tell us what the benefits are of investments that have already been made in transit. And so one question might be, would additional investments in transit provide those same levels of benefits? And it probably would, assuming that there are some unmet needs that still exist within these communities. And there usually are some unmet needs that still exist. And so I'm doing another study right now for North Dakota DOT, where we're trying to identify where those unmet needs are and where investments would yield the greatest benefits. And so to do that, we created some benchmarks, which I showed on this slide, that looking at trips that are being provided per capita, vehicle revenue miles, vehicle revenue hours of service that are being provided per capita, and also not just per capita, but per different populations, per transportation disadvantaged populations. So a number of trips per senior or disabled population, or a number of trips per low income population. So I created these benchmarks and then compared the actual service levels that are being provided to these benchmarks to see where there's the greatest need for additional investments. And these benchmarks are based basically on like national averages. And on the next slide, you can see where I mapped this information. So you can see, like in red and orange, are the areas of North Dakota where they have the lowest levels of service, supplied and consumed. And these are in areas where it has the greatest need for increased investment, and where those increased investments would most likely yield the greatest benefits. So go to the next slide just to sum up. So I found that rural and small urban agencies provide many benefits and economic impacts, and they serve the transportation disadvantages, and providing work and healthcare trips, especially for those groups, provides a lot of value. And these results can be used to help support investment in transit in rural areas. And you can see that report was published a couple of months ago. It's on the MnDOT website and our website, and you can contact me if you want me to send you that report. Thanks.
Jeremy, thank you so much. Excellent presentation. Next up, we have Jonnie Kusek. Jonnie. You there? Can you take her off mute? Okay, Jonnie, are you there?
Hi, can everybody hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Gave a great introduction, and I know that we're on a pretty tight time limit. And so we'll just go ahead and jump right in. If we could have slide 2, please. Okay, and just a little bit of an overview you can see, we'll talk about who we are, our projects and service area, the connections, passengers, how technology affects our operations with drivers and administration, and then a little bit of conclusion on how we feel that our needs are or are not met with technology and some of our concerns. Slide 3, please. Thank you. A little bit about who we are. I actually work for Senior Services Incorporated. We're a 501c3 organization based in Alliance, Nebraska. We've been around since about 1968. We have over 46 years of experience in the public transportation industry, and we are funded with federal and state funds that are allocated through the Nebraska Department of Transportation. Our organization started the first demand response public transportation service for Boxview County in 1974. Operations transitioned to the City of Alliance in 2015. So in 2015, we began planning a new and the only intercity public transportation service in the Panhandle. And so we run that service as regularly scheduled bus service, making meaningful connections with other intermodal transportation services, and actually a lot of access to healthcare. So we actually began planning for that in 2015, and our operations began May of 2016. Something that we discovered as we were rolling out the intercity bus project is how can people get to our bus stops? We live in a very, very large area, sparsely populated, a lot of miles in between communities, and a lot of people that live in remote rural areas. And so visiting with the transit division of NDOT and Carrie Roos, we're putting together some ideas, working with Phoenix also, and how can we put together a volunteer driver program that actually is intended to assist individuals beyond the boundaries of where public transportation does not travel to assist people reaching that closest transportation connection, or to fill those transportation gaps when other transportation services are unavailable, such as on evenings, weekends, those sort of situations. We truly believe that by increasing transportation options for the Nebraska Panhandle, that we can build a stronger region with more vibrant communities and mobility options for all. We have 2 different projects, 1 mission, and that is moving people. Next slide, please. You can see we have a pretty large area. This isn't the greatest map, but it's something that we do utilize a little bit. Right now, we cover over 14,000 square miles is our designated service area. We serve a population base of over 93,000 people. It covers 14 Nebraska counties between the 2 programs. And we also act as a transportation clearinghouse. We get calls from all over the country, Alaska, Hawaii, the East Coast, the West Coast, North, South, asking about transportation services within our area, maybe throughout the state. And so we always try to assist other people in making those connections, whether they're using our services or not. We are here to help keep people mobile, to bring people to our state, to assist passengers wherever we can, and to explain to them all the transportation options that are out there for them. Next slide, please. So, of course, we have our intermodal connections, and we'll start with intercity bus. We have Greyhound bus lines, Greyhound bus partners that we work with, Express Aero and Burlington Trailways. Travel along the I-80 corridor, primarily in the state of Nebraska, but their routes end at Ogallala, Nebraska. And so how can we move people in and out of the Panhandle and east and west across the state of Nebraska? And so we pick up where they leave off. We move as a feeder service in the Panhandle area to our Greyhound bus partners. We also work with the Denver Coach Shuttle. They cover a large portion of the Front Range and our surrounding areas. such as Wyoming, the Front Range of Colorado, and of course, getting people to and from the Denver International Airport. Next slide, please. And then we also work with our airlines. We have the Denver Air Connection that is based here in our hometown of Alliance, Nebraska. We had to kind of chuckle when we seen this recent ad that says, "Our way or the highway." Would you like to reach DIA or to be able to return back to Nebraska from DIA? It can take you an hour if you fly or 5 hours if you choose to drive. And then we also make connections with United Express in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and Boutique Air out of Chadron, Nebraska, which is located in northwest portion of the state. Next slide, please. Then, of course, we couldn't forget our transportation associates, our demand response systems that are located throughout the region. And so we work to coordinate with 13 Nebraska demand response systems. And we also work with one tribal system located on Pine Ridge, South Dakota. So you will see there in the photo on the left, that is with Kimball County Transit Services. They are located in the southwest portion of the region. The middle photo is working with Crawford Public Transit to where we are actually transferring passengers in Chadron, Nebraska, and that passenger continues on up into South Dakota. And then, of course, a picture of the Ogallala Sioux Transit System in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. Next slide, please. So, of course, as Jeremy had hit on, access to care is just critical in rural areas of Nebraska, of the nation. And so we really have a medical hub located in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, which is about 60 miles one way from Alliance. It is one of only 3 level 2 trauma centers in the state. A lot of 32 medical specialties provided, over 28 physician clinics throughout the region. There are nearly 300 in-network providers and over 2,000 employees. And so we work very closely with their staff, a lot with their nursing staff, their dismissal staff, their caseworkers, and help where we can. There's really a large need. They're one of our biggest partners. And so they really have helped us even grow as a system. We're discovering where those needs are and where people need to get to and from. Next slide, please. We have access to care continued. We also have regional hospitals that are located in Alliance, Chadron, Sidney, and Ogallala, Nebraska, that also have major transportation needs of getting people home, maybe to the next community, across the region, whatever the case may be. And then we have a lot of partnerships with people and programs such as Panhandle Public Health, Community Action Partnership located in the region, the Aging Office, Veteran Services, dentists, ophthalmologists, mental health counseling, and getting people to alcohol and drug counseling. And so there's really a major need for those types of services and access to care in our region. Next slide, please. Then access to education. This really became a major service that we discovered was needed. In just the last couple of years, it's really grown. We have Chadron State College, which is the only state college on this end of the state. We provide services for students of Western Nebraska Community College. They have 3 different locations, one in Alliance, Scottsbluff, and Sidney, Nebraska. And then one of our biggest partners is the Pine Ridge Job Corps that teaches individuals ages of 16 to 24 different trade-specific crafts. And so we provide the transportation for those students, their families, those sort of things, and really work together to meet their transportation needs. Next slide, please. Okay, and then just to hit a little bit on our passengers, near and dear to our hearts, of course, What it comes down to is it's not the first mile, it's not the last mile, it's actually usually 60 to 120 miles to assist people in rural, remote areas of the region to really connect with that first transportation service. And so it's just a critical need that we see, you know, if people are not able to have access to healthcare, those sort of things that Jeremy hit on, it's just critical. We see the isolation. We see where people start and their needs start to deteriorate because they don't have access to healthcare, access to food, access to other types of medical care. And so it's something that's near and dear to our heart. Many senior citizens and low-income passengers may not possess phones at all or internet services to be able to book rides. And so we do a lot of one-on-one work with individuals and try to assist them any way that we can. Significant self-service challenges exist, which present reservation difficulties. A lot of times our coverage is spotty in this region. It might take 5 or 6 phone calls, maybe 1 or 2 days to actually get one reservation made for some folks, depending on the service, depending on their location, how connectivity is that day. And so it's a pretty big hurdle, but we try to work around it, roll with it, and help people when and where we can. We are the only option to access medical care outside of family and friends. We are the only accessible, public transportation accessible option for those with special mobility needs that require the use of a wheelchair, lift, or ramp throughout the whole region. We are the only option for those that require an authorized provider for Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services, Medicaid payment, and waiver programs. Next slide, please. Here we have a video. Darlene resides 10 miles west of Alliance, Nebraska in rural Box Butte County. She called us for months begging for transportation so she could access physical therapy and to go to the dentist. Here's a little bit about her story. Don't know if we have any sound.
Apologies, we're having some trouble with the sound on our end. Jonnie, maybe you could fill in some of the gaps for us.
Well, I think basically what it came down to, really called our office for months. She really needed to get to physical therapy after taking a fall in her home. She wasn't found for over 10 hours. She lives alone, so there's that social isolation. She's not able to drive. She really needed to get to physical therapy so that she could just become stronger and be able to age in place in her own home for as long as possible. And we are really happy to say that after months, I promised her one of these days that we would give her a call or she would call us and to let her know that we could actually provide types of services from rural Box Butte County into Alliance, Nebraska to meet her medical needs. And there was just a squeal over the telephone the day that we made the call, and she just sounded like a teenager. She is just, she's a pleasure to work with, so appreciative, is just ecstatic. I know that she appreciates the social interaction, and she's just kind of near and dear to her heart. But for Darlene's story, there's hundreds of others. And so that's just a little bit of background there. And so thank you to Valerie Lefler's team in Phoenix for assisting in making this video for us. Next slide, please. Okay, just want to hit on a little bit about operations. We'll start with our driver portion of that. We do have a low unemployment rate, or we did before the pandemic hit. And so there's really a small labor pool to draw from. And so, I'm just going to kind of go over a few of the hurdles. That is one. It's not unusual for a driver to put in 400 plus miles a day. Doesn't mean that it's all at once, doesn't mean that there isn't breaks in there, but we do have some very, very long days in our operations. Of course, weather in western Nebraska, anywhere in Nebraska, I think you all are familiar with it, wind, snow, and rain, just plays a dangerous part in what we do every year. Poor road conditions, thank you. In DOT, we don't have very many of those conditions out here, but lack of shoulders, traffic congestion, farm equipment, harvest season, they all pose potential safety concerns. And of course, did you hear Heartland Expressway? We love the portion that is done from Alliance down south about 20 miles. What a difference it has made in our operations already, having that small stretch done. It has alleviated a lot of safety concerns. We're dealing with wildlife and, like I mentioned, agricultural equipment, harvest season, a lot of trucking along Nebraska Highway 385, that portion. And so we love the portion of Heartland Expressway. I've been an advocate for over 30 years, and we can't wait to see it when it is completed. As a few of you might know, we had significant cellular service challenges this morning, and those do exist. And this also presents safety challenges for our drivers when they're out there on the road. Utilization of phone apps takes time, education, and patience, whether it's in training, when there's loss of service. And, so sometimes, there is a little bit of frustration that does enter into the picture there. And so just learning to kind of cope with those things, those are things that drivers deal with here every single day. And also the learning fatigue due to inept technology we have discovered causes driver frustration and turnover, which creates challenges in consistent education for drivers in using apps. And so those are a few of the things that our drivers go through on a daily basis. Next slide, please. Of course, when we're looking at technology and different apps, we need it to be user-friendly. Technology is a tool in delivering service, and we must be able to work with changes to rides in real time. With being the only intercity transportation provider out here, changes sometimes have to be made on a dime. And so we need technology that can allow us to go in and change drivers, change vehicles. Maybe there's transfer of passengers from one vehicle to the next. And sometimes this really needs to be done in real time. Cancellations, those sort of things. Being able to contact our drivers if there's inclement weather, different issues of that. Apps must be user-friendly to accommodating quick onboarding for training staff and also for passenger usage. Of course, Google Maps, we love Google Maps, but it doesn't function on some devices in various areas of our region. We always joke, does anybody know where Trail 367 is? If you know the answer, you win a prize that day. So also, any app must be designed to work and store data on devices for areas without cell service from the trip start to the drop-off point. And so we want to make sure that we are using applications that we are not going to lose any data just because we lost cellular services. Then also the software must be designed to allow reporting capabilities that captures all of the data that we want to capture, that is desired, by the end user. And so that might be capturing data of different demographics, how old the person is, maybe what their ethnicity is, what are their special mobility needs, who's an emergency contact. We collect a lot of different data just so that if somebody calls us up and says, hey, how many people of this age on this day of the week of this month, what are the trends? And so we collect a lot of data, and our technology needs to allow for us to do that. Next slide, please. Then, of course, partnering with Phoenix Mobility Riding, Valerie Lefler and her team, they're a great bunch to work with. We contracted services with them for our Panhandle Connect project starting last July or July of 2019. And primarily, they really assisted us with our first scheduling app where we learned what works, what doesn't work, those sort of trials and tribulations. And so it was really nice to have their support. And then, of course, we utilized their services for a lot of marketing in this last year of both of our programs, but primarily for the Panhandle Connect for driver recruitment, passenger recruitment, those sort of things. And so thank you, Valerie, and your team. Next slide, please. And here's another video that we had put together, kind of focused more on economic development. So it looks like we have no sound, but we have some great shots. There's our Vice Mayor of Alliance there, Brian Mishnick, who is also in the construction business. So being able to get his crews to and from his work sites, the economic development for our community, much less our whole region. We have Kim Engel, who is the director of the Panhandle Public Health Department. Just a great team to work with there. If they have transportation needs, issues, we work a lot together with them to collect data, see where the needs are, where gaps in services are. We have a lot of different partnerships with a lot of different organizations. And then you see how our intercity bus service works together with our Panhandle Connect and our volunteer drivers, and just some various shots. This was really a great video, pretty upbeat. Especially both of these videos for being our first attempt. Again, thank you, Phoenix, for that assistance there. We just had a lot of fun doing that. I think, there we go. I think coming to the conclusions on some of the things that we've experienced in the last few years, well, actually, ever since I've been doing this, even during the demand response days, is we really need improved radio coverage is needed in rural areas, FM radio over, just to assist with marketing, getting public awareness out there, educating the public. Even in March of this year, I was in Lincoln, Nebraska, and of course the pandemic was just really coming about to the state of Nebraska, and trying to come home and listen to the radio to be updated on it so I could go directly to my team to discuss what was coming down the pike. It was just sketchy. There just is not that service across the state. And so, you know, it really, some people don't always think about the radio, but we use that a lot in our remote rural areas. And so, you know, weather alerts, breaking news, those sort of things. Another item is increased availability and improved broadband services are needed in all rural communities and areas. We needed to be able to work remotely. I mean, even this morning, being able to try to log into this meeting, we kept losing our internet services, cellular services, those sort of things. And so, you know, really having that consistent, dependable broadband services for people of all ages, for all organizations. And I think if the last couple of months haven't taught us anything with going through some of these unprecedented times, is that just having that connectivity is very, 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 very important all across our state. We've also learned that evolution will never be complete. There is not ever going to be a perfect software. As far as scheduling or routing software, I think for small rural communities, I think it's really a matter of finding the option that works best in rural areas to meet that particular system's needs. I've waited
Jonnie,
yes.
This is Curtis. I need to butt in here for just a second.
Okay.
It's noon, and this is the end of the scheduled time that we have for the webinar. So, and more importantly, we're now cutting into the lunch hour. So we're probably going to be losing some people. And what I want to do is I want to let everybody know here that We still do have one more presenter after Jonnie, and that's going to be on some really neat autonomous vehicles in rural setting. And I think it has definite applications in the state of Nebraska. It should be a fun presentation. And if you cannot stick around for it, I understand. But know also that this presentation is being recorded and will be made available to all the attendees here as soon as we can get it up. It usually takes a couple days to get a recording this long taken care of, so we'll probably have it out, come Monday. But I just wanted to let everybody know before people start logging off that we'd like to finish up the presentation. Even if you can't stick around, you can get it later, via essentially a podcast as a recorded presentation. Through a link that we'll be sending out later. So with that, Jonnie, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, and thank you, Curtis, for that reminder on the time. And like I said, I think where we're at is finding software that meets rural community needs, rural transportation service needs. Like I said, I've been looking for something that would really fit our size of service or system. For over 10 years, I think we've come very close to finding that. We've been utilizing a new technology in the last few months, and so far it's really working out great. We're happy, we're excited about that. I think it's really important that we also have those interface capabilities with technology between providers and contractors, such as health and human service requirements, community action partnerships. And digital literacy and training is needed in rural areas. We really need to keep that at the forefront and helping, maybe not so much the next generation, but maybe some of us boomers here. In the future, I think connecting technologies between transportation providers in a region is going to be essential if we wish to achieve stronger communication and services. I think it's just going to be critical for a regional area to really work together. And so I think it's important. I think it's going to really, it's just going to be critical. And then next slide, please. And wrapping this up, what will the future crossroads of transportation and technology look like, especially for rural areas like the panhandle of Nebraska? And so I had the pleasure of being there when this kicked off, the mayor's challenge and being able to ride in the autonomous vehicle a couple years ago, and what fun. And so with that, just wrap up. And if anybody has any questions, we can sure get back to you at a later time. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonnie. I'm going to switch over now to Valerie Lefler with Phoenix Mobility Rising. Valerie, are you there? Valerie's on mute.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Go ahead, and I'm Valerie Lefler, and excited to share with you about our project working on, or the various projects that we have and partners looking at rural autonomous vehicles. Go ahead and next slide. So Phoenix's mission is really focused on, addressing those underserved communities. Many times this is rural, seniors, individuals with disabilities, and we kind of look at this as a user-centric design model, and with that, bringing the most state-of-the-art technology to solve those challenges. So I grew up in rural southeast Nebraska, if anybody is on the line from Gage County. And we used on the farm, technology from Israel to track, the dairy production and farm animals and things like that. And so I've always been in this space from the time I was a little girl of, even though I grew up on a farm, we were always looking and innovating for advanced technology. So I brought that into this transportation realm when I worked for about 13 years at the University of Nebraska Transportation Center. And so I wanted to say, how do we support those most in need using the best technology and tools available? We also do a lot of advanced marketing, because if you don't know about it, you're not going to write it. And then really focus on creating solutions with local champions in the community. We don't say build it and they will come. We say build it together from day one. And we also believe in data-driven outcomes. And because in 2020, if you can't measure it, it didn't happen. And so we really believe that. Next slide, please. So looking at why rural autonomous vehicles are critical for our community. Number one, if we're looking at autonomous vehicles as the effective safety manifest of the future, over 50% of fatalities in the United States happen on rural roads. So if these autonomous vehicles and future technology can't navigate them, we're losing half the battle before we begin. So we need to really make sure that as we're advancing technology, our rural roads don't get left behind in the innovation continuum. In addition to that, price matters. I mean, Jonnie, you just heard her share about how many hundreds of miles their drivers are going. We had a project in Colorado where we were working with helping farm communities, and some of these families were going 80 to 100 miles to get groceries. That's expensive as an individual. It's expensive to subsidize as a taxpayer. So how can we create affordable technology as well that will support our communities in living in rural areas? Jonnie mentioned limited driver resources, but I also feel on the flip side, the benefit of rural autonomous vehicles is fewer sensor challenges, and there's certainly many fewer pedestrians in these rural areas. So you have less challenges in terms of with lane markings and 6-lane highways and, so many different interfaces. If you're truly talking about rural roads, gravel roads, maybe some low maintenance asphalt roads, there's fewer issues that you're going to run into with that vehicle from a liability perspective. And then autonomous technology has really been led by the ag community. There have been autonomous driving vehicles in agriculture, as our keynote speaker had mentioned, since the 80s. And so, it is just kind of innate in our rural communities to see this and to adopt it. I remember talking to some gentlemen who were at a veterans retirement facility. I was sharing with them, I was like, hey, would you guys ever get in, a Navia-like shuttle? And they asked me 2 questions. Can we smoke? Can we drink? And can we see out the windows? And for them, the autonomous vehicle infrastructure opened up a whole new window to getting out of their facility, to seeing the crops grow, to seeing what's going on, but also this aspect of socialization. And so, their idea was, let's have this as an activity where they could play cards and smoke a cigar, maybe have a shot of whiskey and enjoy a trip around. So anyway, so lots of fun, but definitely a lot of potential in our rural communities. And next slide, please. So I wanted to share about a couple of partners that worked with on some rural autonomous vehicle projects. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology has a computer science and artificial intelligence lab called CSAIL. It is sponsored by Toyota in a big piece of it, but it involves, I think, over 1,800 academics from all branches of discipline. Dr. Daniela Russ is actually grew up in Iowa, farm girl, and she has a graduate student, Mr. Teddy Ort, who's been leading the development of a rural autonomous vehicle that does not rely on 5G or any type of signal to maintain and drive. So, I would love it if we have 5G across the entire state. I don't know if we'll see that by 2040. If we do, that's wonderful. But if we don't, or when there is connection issues from a safety perspective, we need to have a backup. They have created an autonomous vehicle that maps as it drives using kind of a very unique sensor package. Next slide, please. So you can see here from the vehicle sensor data when the vehicles basically go down the roadway, the technology basically maps both sides of the gravel road or the asphalt or whatever it is in real time, up to 14 to 50 feet ahead, depending on the level of accuracy of how far out. And what that does is that enables the car to travel in an area that hasn't been mapped. A lot of autonomous vehicles require very sophisticated, numerous reps of mapping and data packaged in the system, but it's able to basically plunk down in the middle of wherever and provide this package. So we partnered with MIT CSAIL on a proposal in North Dakota with the city of Hillsborough on 2 projects, one for USDOT, another one for the National Science Foundation. on how will these vehicles navigate rural communities, and can we do even further innovative things like put telehealth in them, so the doctor visit comes via robot and they can then beam in and talk to their cardiologist without ever leaving their home. Next slide, please. There's a video here that when the slides get sent out, I recommend you watch. It's about 2 minutes, but it basically goes through the exact route and sensor package that was occurring and all those kind of things. But for the sake of time and video through WebEx, we'll keep going. Next slide, please. The next project is an autonomous rural sensor project that's located in a city about 70 miles outside of Japan. One of the key aspects of this project is it's actually ran out of a gaming company. So we're seeing all sorts of different types of vendors get into this market, really focusing on how do we change the mobility ecosystem? And it's not just cities and counties. We're seeing all sorts of new vendors, and particularly in Japan, they have communities upwards of 40 to 60% over the age of 60 to 85. And so they are globally looking for solutions for their rural communities. Had the opportunity to visit with some of them when I was presenting at ITS World Congress in Singapore, and they're even looking at ordering a shuttle, an autonomous remote shuttle with their TV remote. So, right, you're like, okay, you are not going to teach an 85-year-old woman to use this, but you may be able to get an 85-year-old woman to use her TV remote to order her ride. So there's a variety. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are women who are 85 who use their smartphones, but from the work that we've done with ARP driver safety, 97% of women over the age of 80 and men over the age of 80 prefer to use the phone to call and order their ride. So how do we create technology that's effective and efficient? This particular vehicle goes 6 miles per hour, and it is on a sensor path. They do have Wi-Fi in this area, so it is definitely connected via 5G, but it is utilizing sensor sets that kind of map as it goes and does mechanistic decision-making algorithms based upon what's going on in the sensor packet in front of it. Next slide, please. And again, another video that basically describes this, and it'll be in the deck when it goes out. Next slide, please. Another company that is in the autonomous intelligence space is AI Robotics. I had the opportunity to ride in their vehicle and take a demonstration. And one of the best parts about AI Robotics is they're kind of like an aftermarket retrofit. So they can turn any golf cart, ATV, minivan, into an autonomous vehicle using its algorithm and sensor chip package, and that sensor cost to retrofit those vehicles is anywhere between $15,000 to $30,000. And when you're looking at a full-fledged autonomous vehicle, if you were to buy it out of, kind of in the market, you're looking at least $300,000 to $500,000, depending on the sensor and the setup and the maintenance. Whereas their technology, it's not level 5, it's level 4, but it is an effective way to deploy an autonomous vehicle infrastructure in an environment that does not require any type of 5G. So it can operate with no or zero broadband connection because the sensor chip in front of it is deploying the technology. Next slide, please. Finally, the last company to go over is Cognitive Technologies. They are actually out of Russia. Olga Yuskov is kind of the founder and leader of that organization. It really originated underneath some of the kind of political things that were going on, and they have really created an incredible sensor package that not only works in rural autonomy, but they also have projects utilizing trains, and they have one of the largest autonomous agriculture sensor chips Their strategic approach is really based upon selling the sensors and the chipsets that go into the vehicles, not necessarily trying to create the vehicles themselves. So they have third-party arrangements and agreements, but they are creating these sensor chipsets that are equipped to handle not only urban, but also rural environments. Next slide, please. So this is just a kind of, they actually have a smart harvester. So we all talk about smart tractors and smart planters. Recently, they were awarded a huge nomination at CES and have kind of really put out a broad range of products. Again, going back to the beginning, there is so much overlap between the ag economy and the autonomous vehicle technology. We're seeing this at companies even like ITRS. Next slide, please. These are just two of the images from the sensors set that are coming out in some of the videos on, how do these autonomous vehicles work in snow? How do these autonomous vehicles work in rural areas or roads where there is no rural beaten path or infrastructure? And so they're showing in the video how the sensor packet responds to these differing environments. So again, just another video to check out when you get the slide deck. Next slide, please. And many times you say, why is the small nonprofit focused on autonomous technology? Because we absolutely need innovation to support our rural communities, to support our veterans, to support our seniors, to support minorities, and to really make sure that as our communities grow across the United States and around the world, we're providing the best technology that we can, not only for our urban city centers, but also for our rural communities. So with that, that's all I have for today. And if anybody would like to reach out to me, we would love to partner and work on some pilot opportunities here in Nebraska. So final slide is my contact information.
Excellent presentation, Valerie. Thank you very much. It was very good. I want to ask, I know we are over time, so I want to be considerate of people's time, and I want to ask our panelists if anybody has a need to hurry up and get off. So if we could direct questions to them first, kind of arrange a certain priority. So if any of our panelists have any particular priority of about a need to get off, a need to get elsewhere, then speak up, or else I'll probably just go in order of how we originally spoke with some questions for you. So does anybody have any need to get off soon? Okay, so one question I had about for Matt was, Matt Baker was, again, he was our internal NDOT TSMO engineer, and Matt had briefly talked a little bit about the snowplows, the snowplow dash cam system that we have set up, and I know that is something that I have personally very much been appreciative of, because I think that the 511 website is a little bit conservative. They categorize roads into different categories. Either it's completely covered in snow, partially covered in snow, or it's open. And I think it's a little bit conservative with that. And so what's nice is, well, a lot of times they'll say it's partially covered in snow, and I'm driving it, it's totally fine, there's nothing on it. And what's nice about the dash cams for the snowplows is you can see for yourself what the road looks like if you're going to be traveling in an area where a snowplow is. So I'd like to ask Matt what has been his feedback. Have you heard any feedback about the snowplow software, and yeah, what he's been hearing from people in the state? Matt, what have you got? Anything?
Well, yeah, it's definitely been a huge hit with everyone, both internally and in the public. It demonstrates our efforts that we make in each winter event, and it gives exactly that visual that most people crave of what the conditions are out there on that given stretch of highway, and when's the last time that they were through there. We do actually have some empirical data, graphs showing the level and the immediate spike in use of the 511 website associated with Plow Tracker being unveiled to the public. So I think the feedback is clear. It's definitely a quality product, and we intend on keeping it.
That's excellent to hear. Thank you, Matt. Courtney, do you have any questions for Matt Baker and what his presentation was?
No, I don't. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Jeremy, I had a question for you on your presentation on the work you did in Minnesota there, and the obvious question I have is that you know, you did this research in the state of Minnesota, and I'd be curious to know is you know, how do you think that research that you did in Minnesota would then translate into a state like Nebraska?
Right. Yeah. So you know, every transit agency is a little bit different. Service area characteristics might be a little bit different, and you know, one of the reasons why MnDOT wanted us to do that study was because there hasn't been research specific for Minnesota, and there wasn't a lot of research in general on the benefits of rural transit. But I think that like we did different case studies of different types of transit agencies. So you look at, say, like Paul Bunyan Transit serves a very large rural area, which might be similar to some of the transit agencies in Nebraska or other rural states. So I think that the results for different transit agencies will be a little bit different, but I think generally it would be similar, that you would see benefits being greater than the cost. And I have done a little bit of analysis in North Dakota too, which is, I would say, more similar to Nebraska, with some really large service areas and very low population density areas, and you still see the benefits being greater than the cost. So the ratios might be a little bit different. You might have some higher costs where there's really long, you may have higher cost per trip where you have really long travel distances, but those trips also could provide really high value. Like we found that some of the most rural agencies had the greatest value per trip. So I think you would see, maybe not exactly the same, but you would see something kind of similar. What I would expect, you would see benefits being greater than the costs.
Okay, Courtney, do you have a question for Jeremy?
Yeah, Jeremy, thanks for your presentation. It's very fascinating. I just wanted you to see if you could highlight how Minnesota has been putting this into practice, if you can speak to that at all.
Yeah, and this was just completed pretty recently, but I do know that they are using it. I didn't mention, I created a spreadsheet user tool where you can input data for each transit agency. So like I did the case studies for just those 6, but based on the results, we could input data for other transit agencies and come up with results for those transit agencies. So MnDOT is using that user tool. They are calculating those benefits and benefit cost ratios and some of those economic impacts for each of those transit agencies in the state. And they plan to, I think, update that each year. And how they've used it so far, or how they plan to use it, I'm not exactly sure, but I know that they're making this available for the transit agencies to help. So they can have that, like I created a number of brochures as well, that they can use this to help make the case for increased investment. So they can provide it to decision makers, and so that data is available for them to help support investment. So
actually a tool that you created beyond the research that allows them to utilize this, and that can be then replicated or moved, for example, for Nebraska DOT, based on the outcome of their research, that can be retooled for different agencies.
Yeah. Some of the data in there is kind of specific to Minnesota, although it could be transferred to other states too. And actually some of the input data could be updated or changed for different states or regions. If you have better data that's more specific for your area, that could be changed within that user tool. But in generally, it could be used across the country for different rural areas.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Thank you.
Jeremy, thank you so much for presenting today. It was an excellent presentation. Very, 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 very useful. Thank you. Courtney and Valerie both have expressed a little bit of a sense of urgency about having to get out of here pretty soon. So I'm going to ask Courtney if she has any questions for Valerie, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, Valerie, love your energy and excitement. Thank you again for being here. I'm curious where you see opportunities for piloting AV technologies in Nebraska.
Sure. I think there's definitely a lot of really innovative communities that are in the small urban and rural environment. The community of Hillsborough, North Dakota was only about 14,000 in population base. And we were looking at a couple of different models of creating a shuttle, of autonomous shuttle for helping get folks back and forth between the senior facility and the congregate meal site, or the senior facility and the hospital. So there's also some autonomy that could be brought to there, as well as in rural communities. You know, Jonnie was mentioning, you know, how many first and last mile, maybe first and last 50 miles. And so using those autonomous vehicles in that rural environment to enhance those first and last mile connections and to really move the bar forward. So there are counties or cities in particular that are interested in these kind of pilots and working together with us. We'd love the opportunity, but I think MIT CSAIL is really excited about this opportunity, as well as just any of those technology vendors that I was mentioning, from cognitive technologies to AI robotics to the partners in Japan. NEC has also gotten into this market. And we're really all trying to work together to enhance the quality of life in rural communities. And we know that involves transportation from all the conversation today. And so, you know, what that really would look like in the community is going to depend on the leaders that are at the table. Are we looking at healthcare? Are we looking at increasing access to jobs at an industrial park? Are we looking at reducing fall risks in other environments? So, you know, because we do a user-centric community-based design approach, basically we would work with the local community leaders and really set up what are the goals for this technology, and what are the things that we can do to create solutions in the community, and then basically looking at the buffet of technology that's out there around the world in this space and bringing those best options to the table to meet those needs and fill those challenges. It was incredible, the opportunity to work with Panhandle Trails and Jonnie in saying, okay, well, here's option A. Okay, option A didn't do what we needed. Okay, let's look at option B. Okay, option C, option D, and E, to really figure out what are those needs and how can we dial them in to fit what the community needs.
Excellent. Sounds fantastic. Great opportunities.
Valerie, thank you so much for your presentation today. Wonderful material. I'll let you go. But again, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Jonnie, I have a question for you, and that is, this tech forum is a part of our statewide long-range transportation plan, and I'm emphasizing long-range on that now. And so I'm curious to know on your end is how do you envision transportation service in the Panhandle over the long term?
I am definitely a wheels on the ground sort of gal. So I think one of the greatest things that we could probably see in my lifetime is autonomous vehicles in rural areas of Nebraska. I'm not trying to put us out of a job or anything, but I think it would just be a fantastic option for when traditional transportation services are unavailable, or groups might need charter services. Those sort of things that we cannot specifically do, maybe with the type of funding that we currently have in place. And just how awesome would it be to see those autonomous vehicles running adjacent to our Nebraska highways and out there in our rolling hills in our rural areas. And as Valerie mentioned, just being able to even fill those transportation gaps for seniors, low income people with mobility issues. And I really do see long term, I envision that there's going to be more communication and connectivity, possible zones established for various driver programs and services, interline ticketing of sorts between demand response systems, and of course, intercity bus services, co-sharing vehicles, and absolutely transportation for everyone who needs it.
Excellent. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. I'd like to thank all of our attendees. I see we've still got about 50 on who have hung around to the bitter end. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're putting on another one next week. Same time, same place. We'll see you next week. Thank you everybody for showing up. Maybe if Kyle is still on the line, our director, if he has any closing remarks. Kyle, do you have anything? Sounds like Kyle's good to go. He's actually not there, I'm being told. Okay, all right. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week. We'll see you next week.